Hi! If you have taken any of these classes from this series, you may be a little worked in your body. I most certainly am. I'm filming this last in my set, so I have a nice rollout for you, myofascial release. Whether or not you've done any of this series in this Barre and Pilates glutes and abs class, this is going to be really nice for the body. We're going to get into the hips, outer hips, glutes, some hip flexors, some hamstrings, some thighs, all this good stuff that was worked a lot in this series of classes. Even if, again, you haven't done any of it, it's going to be really nice, but it definitely is a really wonderful complement and very much needed to this active work if you've been following along with me. So, if you have a foam roller, grab it. If you have a therapy ball, grab it. You can also use a tennis ball instead. I don't love the lacrosse ball for the hip flexors. If you have really the edge of a block would be better if you have that. You can also use a strap that's rolled up really nicely. You can use socks that are balled up. You can use a small towel rolled up. Something that's going to give a little bit of give would be preferable versus something that's rock hard. Definitely not a golf ball, anything like that. But if you want to use lacrosse ball into the hip, you're like really keen on that with the glutes, that's fine. Do what you want. But let's grab these if you have. And not going to be rhythmic or anything. If you would like some music, there's a playlist linked to the class, but no pressure needed. We will get started right away. We will simply lie down on our backs with the foam roller underneath your sacrum. So you want the ball nearby, lie down, and the foam roller will go underneath your hips, under the back of your pelvis. And if you've taken any of my other myofascial release, any of the foam rolling stuff classes, I often do like to start or end here. This is really lovely as we give some space out to the front of the hips and we return this nice pelvic stability in the back. And as you get grounded through your feet, let your pelvis simply drape over the foam roller. We will get to lengthen your legs out in a bit, but for now, find some rooting and energy through your feet. And let's take an inhale, start to walk your left foot forward. Exhale any amount that your low back permits. Reach your left heel away from you. And find a little bit of a spiral of your inner thigh down. Now bend your right knee more, draw your right heel off the floor. Maybe you pull your right knee in towards your body. Now if this bothers your low back, you can return your right foot or you can bend your left knee any amount or both. If this bothers your knee, you can go behind your knee instead. Notice how your right hip might try to swing out to the right. Wrap your right hip crease forward and then roll your left inner thigh line down. Sometimes I like to flex my left foot and press the back of the heel down so you find some space across the front of the left hip. Use your abs to draw navel center in. Really feel out this whole nice big ropey hip flexor space and the left side open. And then with your exhale, soften your right knee and leg a little bit closer to you. Use your arms to simply descend your thigh bone. No need to force or strain. Big breath in. Deep breath out. Find some room. Slowly bend your left knee. Replant your right foot down. Anchor, make sure you're centered. And then your right foot will walk forward any amount that your low back permits. Feel out this hip extension. And then slowly bend your left knee more. Come onto your left toes. Maybe you glide your left knee in. You can reach to the front of your shin and knee or behind your knee and thigh instead. If this bothers your low back, plant your left foot down and or rebend your right knee any amount. Notice your left hip now may try to slide out. Move your left hip crease away from your left shoulder. And then find a little wrap of your right inner thigh down and maybe a flex of your right foot to help anchor the back of your right heel and open across the front of this hip. Every exhale, descend your left thigh towards you just a touch. Inhale. Easy exhale. Slowly rebend your right knee foot down. Left foot returns back down. And then take a little chug forward and back as you roll up and down across the very top of your glutes and through the very lower part of your pelvis. And as long as there's like some give to whatever you have, you should be good rolling onto the bones. If there's no give, just roll a little lower so it's not so much in your sacrum but more into the upper glute space. And then we'll keep this as you root down, lift your hips up. Simply slide the foam roller aside. We'll need it later. Roll your pelvis down, grab your ball, and tuck it underneath your right glute. And you can just kind of go wherever. You can go, I usually say to aim for the center of the glute space that touches the ground when you're here. So we'll end up in the upper outer glute. And then a few times butterfly your right knee out and in just gently. You can move with the breath, inhale or exhale to open, exhale or inhale to close, or you can just simply let it glide and bypass the breath as long as inhales and exhales are smooth and free. And then as you open your right knee out, let's pause there. And notice if you're really gripping and clenching the glute, try to soften it. You might even give a little engagement and then soften to really get the muscle to turn off. And little squeeze and soften as you feel some space in this outer right glute and hip. And simply hold for a moment. If this is feeling good, if you're in a good spot, you can stay. If you want to find a little movement, you can shift your pelvis a little to the left, a little to the right. Bump your left hip over to the left and kind of drag the hip tissue over as the ball moves. That feels really good for me. Gives this nice space across my piriformis and glute medius as I wiggle my hips over. And sometimes I work with two balls, but as we just work with the one or the corner of the block, you can wedge into your hip as well. Works quite nicely. We'll just focus on the one side at a time. And then if you'd like to reposition the ball in a little closer, a little up or a little down or out more, you can find a new spot. You can again roll around on it. But if you find something good, if you find something interesting, hold for at least a couple breaths to feel out that space versus just randomly going around and skipping past any good sticky parts. Last couple spots or breaths here on this side and the back of the hip before we move on. And we're going to stay with this right glute, but we're moving into the TFL from the front side is how I like to do this. So grab the ball, feet and knees planted, and just notice, and like right side of my pelvis feels like so much heavier. It feels like this whole side is going to drop down if anything's shifted. Bring the ball to the front of your right hip, frontal hip bone, bony landmark as is, ASIS, anterior superior iliac spine. Yes, this bony landmark in the front of the pelvis. Roll the ball straight down towards the ground from there. Now just like hold it right there. It's right up against your hip. You're not going to lift your hips to place it under. Just hold it right there. Draw your knees into your chest and rock up and over onto the ball. And you'll find this really sticky spot in the hip called your tensor fascia lata, your TFL. And if you're like, I'm not sure, try it again. Frontal hip bone, straight up on top of it, roll it straight down to the ground, hold the ball right there, and then roll up and over onto it. You might not get all the way onto your side. You might need to just have one knee and one leg open. You might be halfway there and feel your whole body grip. Fortunately, I have been doing some good work, so I'm feeling like this is not as gnarly as sometimes it is. But it feels like a good release from all the work that I have done this evening filming this series for you. And see if you can soften the rest of your body so that you're not gripping the tension, but you're giving some good exhales to melt yourself over the ball. You might even feel the muscle flicker on and off a little bit. Notice if there's any extra holding where you can soften. Take a deep breath in. And a deep breath out. Slowly roll back off of the ball onto your back. And let's lift your hips, slide the ball underneath your left glute. I like center of the glute space that touches the floor, so upper outer glute. And as you find this, let your left knee butterfly out and in a few times. You can move with the breath or not with the breath. It doesn't need to be super, super specific. If you want it to be, it can, but it is all good if it's a little bit more organic and free. And then open your knee and pause. Give some heaviness to the thigh as you wedge that in there. Let's just hold this one spot before you move around too much. And notice if there's like a gripping in the glute, try to soften. You might engage and soften a couple times. Squeeze the glute a little, relax the glute, little squeeze, relax. Now, maybe this is interesting here and you want to stay. You want to roll a little bit. You can shift your hips to the right and kind of drag across the back line of the TFL and across the piriformis. Can be really nice. This like side to side movement. Maybe you go up, down a little. Maybe you find a new spot. Maybe you circle a little. But if you find something good, find something sticky, something intense, you might choose to hold for a couple of breaths at least to feel out that spot. To make sure you have some sort of pause. And if you want movement, you're welcome to feel that out. Big inhale. And big exhale. Okay, let's bring it center, pelvis down. Feel the left side of your pelvis is heavy. Place the ball on the front of your left hip bone. ASIS. Roll it straight down to the floor from there. Hold the ball right there. Do not lift your hips. Do not let the ball slide out. Just roll it straight down. Hold it there. Draw your knees to your chest. And now in one piece, up and over onto the ball. As you find your TFL, it's this small muscle in the front and kind of outer hip space. And it's very, very small, but it's very high maintenance. It's kind of like a super fancy espresso drink that is teeny tiny but packs a lot of punch. And this muscle wants to do everything. It wants to kick in for the glutes. It wants to kick in for the core. And so it acts as a hip flexor. It also acts as an abductor. It acts as an internal rotator of the thigh. There's a lot that it's doing. It acts as a stabilizer. When other things aren't working, it will jump in there and be like, I got it, and kick in. Yes, but we want to be able to soften it. We don't want the TFL to be doing all of the things for all the muscles that are dormant or sleepy or deactivated or simply turned off from sitting and not engaging them. We want, or tight, right? Tight, weak muscles. We want to activate the things that need activating and soften the things we want to release so that those other things can kick in a little bit better. Take a deep breath in. Exhale, try to melt over the ball, and then we'll carefully roll back onto your back. Okay. Windshield wipe your legs a little bit side to side. Allow a bit of a release into that. And then let's rock yourself to one side and press yourself up. Okay. Let's grab a hold of our foam roller again. We'll continue with our glutes as you come up to sit on it. And now this will be a little bit more, what's nice about a bigger surface area is you can kind of like roll a little bit more. So bring the ball underneath your right glute and you can just simply roll forward and back. I like my hands behind me, my left foot planted to the ground, and I kind of use my right leg to bend and extend as I roll across my right glute. You can go more towards the center and more towards your sacrum. You can roll more towards the side and really into the whole abductor line. And if you find something interesting or find something good, then you can pause and hold. You can also lower to your elbow if you'd like. But it covers a lot of surface area, so usually a little bit less intense than the ball. And we won't get quite as deep into things, but we'll be able to cover more area. So it's nice. Different techniques with different tools is always good. And then let's roll a little bit into your right back of thigh. So take the foam roller down, plant your left foot, and then roll along the back of the thigh. And you don't need to go super far down towards the knee. I'd rather you spend a little bit more time in the mid and upper thigh. And as you do this, turn your leg and your toes out a little bit and then turn them in a little bit. So you're moving down the medial line, semimembranosus, this hamstring line, and then the lateral line as well, and more towards the back seam of the IT band, iliotibial band, this big line of fascia that moves from the hip where the TFL is, where we just were. It's where it originates, and it goes down to the knee, and then it moves and continues down the leg into the foot. And so that band of fascia is needed. It gives us support and structure. But it can get a little agitated. And instead of rolling straight on the IT band, I'm a big fan of rolling along the seam, the front and back seam. So the quad seam and the hamstring seam will be a little bit more effective and less agitating to that tissue. Now let's go to the left side, left glute and hip on, and give yourself a little roll up and down, forward and back a bit as you move through. And you can again work this left leg to bend and extend for you to find some good room. You can roll more towards the back of your pelvis. You can roll more towards the side of your hip. You can lower your elbow down. It can be fairly exploratory as you go. And if there's something really good, some sticky, juicy spot, then you can absolutely hold. And then let's move to your hamstrings, the back of the left thigh. Find some roll. And you can feel out the whole length of it, but I really find a lot of, for me, good stuff along that back seam of the IT band and more into like the meaty part of the thigh. Try turning in and out and see how that feels, where things are a little bit tighter and stickier and give you more feedback. I had knee surgery 10 years ago this month, which is so nuts. I think I'm like a few days away from the 10-year exact anniversary. And I have this fascial adhesion in my left IT band down close to the knee that has never quite gone back. So for me, there's always a lot of really good stuff here, especially in the quad space, which we'll get to next. All right, let's come up and simply turn yourself around, and we'll move into the right thigh. Front of the thigh. So as you rest your body on, I like to take an army crawl position on my elbows, left knee is bent, and I roll up and down my front of thigh, the quads. So your hamstrings, you have 3 hamstrings in the back, 3 parts of the muscle. You have semimembranosus, which is the medial, semitendinosus, and biceps femoris. Biceps femoris kind of covers the back. You have the biceps of the arm we're familiar with, biceps brachii, and then you have biceps femoris, which is of the femur, right? The biceps of the femur of the lower body. The femur is the thigh bone. And then in the front, you have 4 muscles, thus the name quadriceps. We have vastus medialis obliquus, which is on the inside, vastus lateralis, which is on the outside. Rectus femoris is the big one that crosses the hip as well. So it's not only a knee extensor, but it's also a hip flexor. So let's move up into that space and move just to the very ropey part of the hip, and then move down a little bit into the thigh and do that cross up towards the hip bone and then down the thigh. And with a foam roller, you can pretty reasonably do this. You can also tuck your toes if you like. It's fairly safe to do this. I mean, you don't want to like put a golf ball in here. There's also the inguinal gland and nerve and situation that we don't want to be rolling anything super sharp and hard in, because we can like damage some stuff. We don't want to do that. Definitely not. But we can use the foam roller. And if you turn your leg out and in, you might notice some difference. And again, you might find the IT band seam interesting. The outer line of your hip and thigh down in towards the front. So where the quads meet the IT band on the front seam, for me, is like all the good stuff. Oh. And we have some more muscles in the hip and thigh, but those are the big ones that we'll talk about right now. Okay, let's switch to your left thigh, quadriceps. You might choose to bend your right knee out to the side and find your army crawl position and roll yourself forward and back. As you move down towards the knee, not all the way to the knee, but towards the knee and then up towards the hip. As you roll across the front of the thigh, and then we might move a little bit inner and outer. And notice if this side feels different at all. It may be a big difference. It may be not so much. Let's move to the hip flexors a bit. Yes, let's cross the hip where rectum goes over. Rectus femoris. Again, femoris femur. in the front of the thigh. Longest bone in the body is your thigh bone, your femur bone. And then if you turn your leg in and out a little bit, see how that changes things. For me, this is where it gets really gnarly in my fascial adhesion, is when I turn my leg in and I turn more towards my side and I move towards the seam, not directly on the IT band, but the quad and front seam connection. Ooh, really intense. Really, really intense. A few more breaths. Oy vey. And if you just did, again, some of these barre classes and Pilates stuff with me, the hip flexors definitely worked, the quads worked, the glutes for sure, but all this stuff is integrated. Okay, let's come off of that. We're almost done here. Remove your foam roller as you come onto your belly. Grab your ball, and let's place it underneath your right hip flexors. So you want to be really gentle. We don't want anything that's super, super hard here. I'd rather you use balled up socks, right? I'd rather you use like a towel. I'd rather use a strap that's rolled up. Can be really nice to tuck in here than to use like a golf ball or lacrosse ball. Please do not use something super, super intense. And you might be tempted to. And I like to tuck my toes. And then I really do bend my knee, opposite knee out to the side. And I kind of like use the chug and tuck of my toes to roll me forward and back a little bit into this. Now, this is really intense. You don't need to move. You can simply hold where you are. And you might play with moving to the TFL again. So another angle, if you internally rotate and you turn your pelvis a little to the left and you let your toes turn a little to the left, you'll catch the outer part of the hip flexor, which is, again, that same TFL muscle that we targeted from the back when we placed the ball from your side on the hip, right? Now we're kind of targeting it from the front, so just a different angle. And you might kind of like let your hip and thigh relax over it. So like you soften your pelvis and try to just let your hips be heavy. Sometimes I give like a tiny, tiny lengthen of my tailbone or like a little squeeze of the glute and then like soften. Some of this reciprocal inhibition, a little pressure, a little release, just the tiniest bit of alignment change can direct how the pressure is on the ball. And then bring this leg parallel and see what happens if you hamstring curl your heel towards your butt and press your heel towards the sky. So kind of like we did if you took my classic barre glutes. We did the prone work, right, before we went up to tabletop and standing. You might feel that out. Little hamstring curl, little press as you release out the front of the hip. And then slowly remove the ball. Lengthen your left leg back out if it's bent. Let's tuck the ball underneath your left hip. Last bit here. Left hip flexors, right into the front of the hip, below the hip bone. Maybe you bend your right knee out to the side. I most certainly enjoy that. You might tuck your toes and find the little babyest chug and shift forward and back to explore the front of this hip. If there's anything really intense, please do not just kind of jam in there, right? Be gentle. You can always take some pressure off by also coming up to your elbows. I did not say that on the other side, but you have some options of how you rest your body weight here. And then see what happens if you move just a little. You turn your pelvis slightly to the right, and the ball might catch the TFL, tensor fascia lata, in the front outer hip space, just a little to the left of the ropey hip flexors. Be careful going across, back and forth, but you can. And then you might bring it back to parallel, and you might find a little hamstring curl and squeeze of the glute as you work into some reciprocal inhibition. We engage the back of the hip and thigh to help open up the front of the hip and thigh. And that may be reminiscent from some of your active work earlier. It doesn't need to be the biggest contraction, but just notice. And what happens if you soften over the ball. Big breath in. Deep breath out. Little length of tailbone versus not. And then when you are ready, you slowly remove the ball. Lengthen your legs back. Let the front of your pelvis spill forward. And just breathe wide into your low back. Give your hips a little wiggle. Try to soften the tissues and the muscles off of your hips and your thighs. You have one more thing to reset your pelvis. Flip back over onto your back. Bend your knees, plant your feet. That's one of my favorite things. If you haven't done this with me, I hope you enjoy it. We'll take some sacral thumping. So press through your feet, hips lift, and drop your pelvis. Drop, drop. So it's like you're creating this thud and ricochet and ripple through your body. So your hips drop and you'll feel it like reverb and echo through the body. Instead of trying to engage, soften. So you're really trying to like let the muscles jiggle, let the tissues really jiggle and soften each time. Last few. 3, 2, 1. Knees together, feet apart, hand on heart, hand on belly. Take a big breath in. And a deep breath out. If you would like to stay, you are welcome to stay. Thank you for moving with me. Thank you for lengthening with me and giving your body a little TLC. I enjoyed moving with you always. I hope you have a wonderful time with this series, and I hope to see you again soon.